Have you ever, really paused to think about every single word Jesus said? Like the exact phrasing he used in the Gospels. It's often in those little details, the ones we might skim over, that some really profound truths are waiting. And today we're going to do a deep dive into one of those details. It's a phrase that, honestly, for a lot of people reading it for the first time, it kind of makes you stop. Maybe feels a bit awkward or surprising. We're talking about those times when Jesus, the Son of God, addresses his own mother, Mary, as woman. Now, to our modern ears, right, in just everyday English, that can sound incredibly abrupt, almost dismissive, wouldn't you say? I mean, it's definitely not how most of us would, lovingly talk to our own mothers. So the immediate reaction is often something like, why didn't he just say mother? Or was he actually rebuking her? Did it sound told? It's a question that's puzzled people, scholars, regular readers, you name it, for centuries. But what if? What if that simple word woman isn't about distance or telling off at all? What if it actually holds this incredibly profound, intentional purpose?
Something that's maybe been hiding in plain sight. A declaration of divine significance just waiting for us to see it. So that's what we're doing today. We're diving deep into this fascinating question. We've looked at a whole collection of really insightful sources, theological, linguistic, and these insights, they really challenge our our modern gut reactions about this interaction. So our mission really is to unpack all of that, to get to the true, deeper meaning behind why Jesus used this specific address, and hopefully show that it wasn't about coldness or rebuke at all, but actually it was this profound statement about Mary's unique, absolutely pivotal, and you could even say cosmic role in God's huge story of salvation. Okay, so let's start where most people first notice it. That first instance that catches you off guard, it's early in Jesus' public ministry. There's this wedding celebration, maybe a bit of a social crisis brewing. The wedding at Cana, John chapter 2 tells us about it. Mary comes up to Jesus. She's concerned, right? But she puts it very simply, very subtly. They have no more wine.
She's basically pointing out the problem, the potential embarrassment for the family. And then you get Jesus' response, word for word from the text. Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come. And bam, that word woman just jumps right out, doesn't it? For so many people, the immediate thought is, whoa, why not mother? Was he being disrespectful? Did it sound harsh? It feels unusual, in that family context.
It really does. And that's a completely natural reaction given our modern context.
Right. So this one word choice, this seemingly small detail, it really kicks off a much bigger investigation into what it truly means.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our first assumptions might be way off base here. Exactly. That's precisely where we need to begin, by challenging those immediate modern assumptions we bring to the text. It's such a common issue, isn't it? When we read ancient writings, we instinctively filter them through our own 21st century cultural understanding, our language norms, our ideas of etiquette, and that can lead to some really significant misunderstandings. So let's just tackle that misconception straight away. In the culture Jesus lived in, the Greek term used there, gyne, which translates to woman. It was absolutely not a term of disrespect, not even close. It wasn't a rebuke. This is fundamentally important to grasp. Yeah, the sources we've looked at are really clear on this, quite emphatic actually. They explain that gyne was considered a title of honor. It was a respectful way to address a woman. Some sources say it's quite similar to ma'am or madam in English today. Think about it, if you were addressing a respected older woman or someone of high standing, maybe even royalty, in a somewhat formal or public setting, you wouldn't typically use her first name, and you definitely wouldn't call her mother unless you were actually her child. So, using ma'am or madam shows respect, acknowledges her dignity, her presence, her standing as a person, without necessarily highlighting a family tie.
Okay, so it's formal, but respectful.
Yeah.
Like acknowledging her status.
Precisely. It recognizes her personhood and standing. So any idea that Jesus was being abrupt or rude or cold to Mary just kind of dissolves once you understand the linguistic and cultural background of that time. What's fascinating here is just how easily our modern ears can get it wrong, Yeah. We misinterpret these ancient nuances and jump to conclusions that are the complete opposite of what was intended.
That makes so much sense.
It's a really powerful reminder, I think, about how crucial historical and cultural context is for understanding any text, but especially sacred texts that span thousands of years. So far from being dismissive, this word choice, gyne, was actually entirely respectful in that setting. You could even argue it was the most dignified way for him to address her publicly at that moment.
Wow, okay. That is incredibly clarifying. And I bet that brings a lot of relief to listeners, actually, because it just completely reframes that whole interaction at Cana, doesn't it? It goes from something potentially awkward or maybe even, scandalous sounding to us to something totally normal and respectful for that period. It just shifts the whole perspective. But okay, the sources you mentioned, they don't just stop at, it wasn't disrespectful. They push further. They suggest that, yes, the cultural context clears up the respect issue, but Jesus wasn't only speaking culturally. The sources indicate, and this is where it gets really interesting, he was signaling something divine. So what does that mean? If it's more than just politeness, what's the next layer? What deeper meaning is being hinted at here?
Yes, indeed. And that's where this deep dive really gets, well, deep. It's not quite enough to just establish that the term wasn't disrespectful. We really need to explore why this particular honorific, gynae, was chosen. And not just chosen once, but twice, at what you could argue are the two absolute bookends, the most pivotal moments of his public ministry.
Right, the consistency is key.
That consistency is the absolute key. It strongly suggests something much more profound is going on than just adhering to a polite cultural convention. I mean, if it was only about being polite, maybe another respectful term could have worked. Or maybe the choice wouldn't carry such weight across two such different but equally critical moments. Our sources really emphasize that Jesus was, in a sense, sending a signal, telegraphing a deeper theological truth about Mary's role, a truth that actually goes beyond her earthly motherhood.
So it's an intentional choice.
Highly intentional, a linguistic choice, loaded with meaning, designed perhaps to make us stop and think, to draw our attention to a much bigger spiritual reality that kind of echoes through the whole Bible.
And to really drive that point home, we absolutely have to talk about the second time he uses it, the other crucial instance. And this one is, incredibly solemn, just profoundly significant. We shift from a wedding celebration to the crucifixion, the very end of his earthly life, as John describes it in chapter 19, verse 26. Just try to picture it for a moment. Jesus is on the cross. He's in agony, unimaginable pain. His body is broken. His strength is gone. Life is draining away. But even then, even in that state of ultimate suffering, he looks down, and who does he see there? His mother, Mary, standing right there, witnessing this horror, her own heart just shattered with grief, standing beside the disciple John. And in that moment, this moment of ultimate sacrifice, but also, profound love and tender care, Jesus speaks. He says to Mary, "Woman, behold your son." And then he looks at John and says, "Behold your mother." Okay, this is where it gets really compelling for me. Why on earth would he use the exact same address, woman, here, at this moment of peak suffering, peak love, peak significance?
If, let's just say for argument's sake, it was some kind of subtle rebuke or distancing at Cana, which we now know it wasn't, but if it was, why use it again here? Here, where the mood is so incredibly tender, where he's essentially handing over the care of his mother, his most precious earthly relationship, right before he dies.
It's exact. The repetition just can't be accidental. It feels deliberate. This consistent use of woman at the start and the absolute finish of his public work, it just forces you to look deeper, doesn't it? It feels like a thread connecting everything. It absolutely does. That consistency is the undeniable clue, the thing that really pushes us beyond just saying, oh, it was cultural. Because think about it, if it had been a rebuke at Cana, as those initial incorrect assumptions might suggest, then using it again at the foot of the cross, it would be completely nonsensical. Worse than that, it would be jarringly cruel. But there, in his deepest pain, what's he doing? He's making sure his mother will be cared for. Physically, emotionally, he's showing immense love, profound concern. He's honoring her in this incredibly unique way. Our sources really highlight this point. Even in his pain, he honored her. He was ensuring her future, entrusting her to John, his beloved disciple. So the paradox for you, the listener, becomes really clear. How could a word that might sound cold to us at Cana be used in such a loving, significant, honoring way at the cross?
Right, it forces a reevaluation of Cana.
Precisely. The answer, as we've established, is that it wasn't cold or a rebuke at Cana in the first place. Its consistent use at these two absolutely pivotal yet very different moments, the start of his public work at Cana, signifying the beginning of his saving mission, and the culmination of that work on the cross, where salvation is achieved, that consistency points to a continuous, overarching, and deeply intentional purpose behind the word choice.
Okay.
This repetition, it's not just a coincidence or a stylistic choice, it's a critical signal. It's like a theological signpost planted firmly at both ends of his ministry. It tells us that the term woman is doing more work here than just being a polite address or referencing a family tie. It's speaking to something bigger, a consistent, almost cosmic understanding of who Mary is and what her role is in the whole divine story, a deeper theological truth woven right into these moments, inviting us to look past the surface.
Okay, so if it's definitely not a rebuke, and it's clearly more than just being polite, and crucially, it's used at these two key moments, the beginning and the end, then it must be pointing to something much bigger, something profound. This feels like the aha moment we've been building up to, the really deep insight from the sources. And what really clicked for me digging into this was the connection they make. They say to really get the full meaning, you have to go back to the very beginning, Genesis 2.23. Wow, back to Genesis. That's a big jump, but it feels significant.
It is a big jump, but it's where the pieces really start to fall into place, especially when you understand this powerful concept called biblical typology. So Genesis 2.23, this is right after Eve is created from Adam's side. Adam sees her and proclaims, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man." She's named Womanisha in the original Hebrew in that foundational moment. And it's explicitly linked not just to her being Adam's partner, but later in Genesis 3.20, she's called Eve because she would become the mother of all living.
Ah, okay. So woman is tied to motherhood and life right from the start.
Exactly. That original naming establishes this fundamental, divinely intended connection between the very concept of woman and motherhood, life itself, the origin of humanity. It wasn't just a label, it was a designation of her unique, absolutely central place in creation and in the whole story of humanity that was about to unfold. Now, here's the connection point. We need to bring in this key theological idea. Jesus as the second Adam. You know the story of the first Adam, through his disobedience in the garden, brought sin and death into the world. That's the fall. But the second Adam, Jesus, through his perfect life, his obedience, his sacrifice on the cross, he reverses all that. He ushers in redemption, forgiveness, new life. He starts a new spiritual creation, a pathway back to God.
Right, like hitting the reset button, but in a much more profound way.
In a way, yes, a redemptive way. So if you think about this through the lens of biblical typology, which is basically how earlier people, events, or things in the Old Testament symbolically foreshadow later, greater realities, especially Christ and his work.
Like the Passover lamb prefiguring Jesus.
Exactly, or the manna in the desert prefiguring the Eucharist. It's seeing these divinely intended patterns. So just as Adam foreshadows Christ, the sources argue that Eve, the first woman, foreshadows a new woman who plays a crucial role in God's plan of redemption. You start to see this incredible, deliberate pattern emerging.
Okay, I think I'm following this. Eve is the woman of the first creation, tied to the fall. Jesus is the second Adam, starting the new creation, redemption. So where does Mary fit into this? How does calling her woman connect her to Eve and this whole second Adam concept? It still feels like a really bold connection the sources are making.
It is bold, but it's not a leap once you see the overarching biblical narrative. And honestly, it's breathtaking when you grasp the theological weight of it. By consistently calling Mary woman, specifically at Cana, which kicks off his public work, and then again at the cross, which completes it, the sources argue powerfully that Jesus is intentionally pointing to Mary as the new Eve.
The new Eve, wow.
Yes. This is the central, the really revelatory insight here. It's a concept theologians have explored for centuries, finding deep roots in scripture and tradition. So let's break down what that actually means for you, the listener, because it's huge. First, it's about her elevation in God's redemptive plan. Think about it. This isn't just about Mary being Jesus' earthly mother. As incredible and unique as that role is, this elevates her way beyond that. It places her in this unique, pivotal, divinely chosen role within the grand cosmic story of salvation.
So it's like Eve was central to the start of the human story in the fall.
Exactly. Mary is being positioned by Jesus himself as central to the new beginning, the story of redemption, the undoing of the fall. Her active cooperation with God's plan, her yes, stands in stark contrast to Eve's disobedience. She's integral to the new creation. And second, flowing from that, she becomes this powerful symbol of new creation. Just as Eve represented the start of humanity and sadly the entry of sin and death, Mary, as the new Eve, comes to symbolize the whole reality of the new creation and the new covenant that Jesus establishes through his life, death, and resurrection.
What do you mean exactly by new creation and new covenant here?
Good question. The new creation isn't just about individual spiritual rebirth, though it includes that. It's about God initiating a transformative renewal of all things through Christ. And the new covenant is God's new relationship with humanity, established through Jesus, based on grace and faith, fulfilling and superseding the Old Testament covenant based on law. And Mary's role. Her complete and utter yes to God, remember her words, her fiat, "Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word." That act of total trusting obedience was the doorway through which the incarnation happened. Her obedience is the direct counterpoint to Eve's disobedience. It makes her, in a symbolic sense, the mother of this new redeemed humanity, the mother of all who find life in Christ. The sources really nail this. Mary wasn't just his earthly mother, she symbolized the new creation, the new covenant, by her obedient acceptance of God's will, just as Eve's disobedience brought about the fall of the old. So when Jesus says woman to her, especially at the cross, woman, behold your son, referring to John, and then tells John, behold your mother, he's doing far more than just arranging for her practical care.
He's making a bigger statement.
He's making a huge theological statement. He's symbolically presenting Mary as the spiritual mother of all his disciples, everyone who would become part of this new humanity born from his sacrifice. This is why that phrase from the sources is so powerful. Not separation, elevation. It sums it all up. Calling her woman wasn't Jesus pushing her away. Not at all. It was a deliberate, divine declaration of her incredibly high, unique place in God's eternal plan for saving the world. It points to her theological identity, which goes way beyond just the family bond, revealing her universal role.
Wow.
Yeah. And understanding that connection, that typology, it just fundamentally changes how you read those gospel scenes. It adds layers and layers of meaning you might have missed. It really shows the amazing coherence and depth of the Bible's story and God's careful design within it.
That is just an incredible shift in perspective. Truly profound. So it wasn't about diminishing Mary at all, not making her less important. It was actually doing the opposite, magnifying her significance, but on this grand cosmic scale, connecting her directly to God's whole plan of redemption. It takes her role way beyond just the personal mother-son relationship, important as that was, and puts her right at the heart of this huge divine drama. Absolutely critical, indispensable even.
Indispensable is a good word for it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
When we talk about her cosmic role, that's what we mean. Mary wasn't just, a passive container for God's plan. She wasn't just biologically necessary. No, she was a vital, active, and unique part of God's eternal story of salvation. Think about her fiat again, her conscious, free choice, her yes to the angel Gabriel at the Annunciation. That moment, that decision, was the hinge on which human history turned towards the incarnation.
The moment God's plan entered the world in a new way.
Exactly. It was through her radical openness, her faith, her obedience, that the divine chose to intersect with the human in the most intimate way possible. The sources state it so simply but powerfully. Through her, the Word became flesh. That single theological statement sums up her absolutely unique and unrepeatable role in making God's plan happen. Without her yes, without her physical being cooperating with the Holy Spirit, God becoming human, entering our history, our world, physically just wouldn't have happened in the way it did. And grasping this, it really does transform how you see Mary in the whole Christian story. She's not just, a supporting character who shows up occasionally in the Gospels.
Right, she's not just in the background of the nativity scene.
Far from it. She's an active, essential participant in the biggest story ever told. Understanding this adds so much depth and purpose to her presence, especially at moments like Cana and the cross. It turns what might seem like a strange word choice, woman, into this profound theological declaration. And this raises an important question for all of us, doesn't it? How often do we just skim over familiar words, simple phrases, well-known stories in the Bible, or any important text, really? How often do we miss the intricate connections, the layers of meaning that are sitting right there, waiting to be discovered if we just dig a little deeper?
That's a great point.
The precision in Jesus's language, even in what seem like casual moments or highly emotional ones, it often holds the key to unlocking really deep truths about who God is, his meticulous plan, and how he works in the world. It really speaks to the careful crafting, maybe even the divine inspiration behind these texts, inviting us to always be curious and look beneath the surface.
So, okay, let's bring this all together. The next time you read the Gospels, the next time you encounter Jesus calling Mary woman, whether it's at that wedding feast in Cana or looking down from the agony of the cross, remember this deep dive. Remember, it wasn't casual, it wasn't harsh, it wasn't dismissive. It was deeply, deeply intentional. It was a deliberate, divinely guided choice of words that positioned her not just as his earthly mother, but as the new Eve, the symbolic mother of the new creation, a vital, irreplaceable part of God's amazing plan to save humanity. It was nothing less than a divine declaration of her incredibly high place in God's story. A truth that, as we said, has kind of been hidden in plain sight for centuries, just waiting for us to unpack it, to really grasp its cosmic importance.
And that really is the value, the reward of doing these kinds of deep dives into the sources, isn't it? It pushes us to look beyond the obvious, to question our first impressions, maybe even challenge long-held assumptions. It helps us uncover the rich, complex, layered meanings that are so often hidden just beneath the surface of familiar things. So maybe, as a final thought to leave you with, just consider how much more meaning might be hidden in plain sight in other texts you know well, other foundational stories, maybe even in the patterns of your own life or the world around you. How might understanding these subtle yet incredibly profound layers of meaning like the one we explored today, how might that transform your own understanding of the stories and beliefs that shape you? And maybe, just maybe, how might it spark a greater curiosity to always look a little deeper, to seek the richness that lies beyond the surface?